By 1950, China had been fighting in wars almost non-stop for 100 years. Rebellions, wars to expel foreigners, and civil wars had riddled the country for over a century. There were numerous changes in power, including the end of dynastic reign in China, followed by a political vacuum in central China, known as the Warlord Era, a nationalist communist civil war, a Japanese invasion, a world war, and a renewed war between communists and nationalists, followed by the birth of the People's Republic of China and the formation of Taiwan as an exiled nationalist state. This period of chaos was ignited by an uprising in central China and the city of Wuchang in 1911. China had been under dynastic rule for over 2,000 years. The current dynasty, the Qings, were a faction from the northern grasslands, but by 1910, the Qings were unable to effectively rule China. The Qing government was an outdated and ineffective dynastic system that had become obsolete in a modernizing world, leading to their inability to run as a world power or anything that would remotely resemble one.
Worldviews of China was inferior. It had been centuries since the world looked at China as being kind of I don't know about a superior, but an exemplary culture. Most European powers, the Americans, the Japanese, all looked at China as second class.
Many conflicts around the turn of the century were an effort to force foreigners from the empire. Countries like Japan, France, Germany, Britain, and the US were all looked down on by Chinese.
If you look at China in the 19th century, there's Brits, French, Prussians, Germans, Russians, Japanese after 1868, just running around the country, expanding, getting what they want, extracting all kinds of concessions from China.
There were also many other conflicts involving only Chinese factions, in an effort to dislodge Qing rule or gain control of the country, all leading to the eventual 1911 revolution.
Before the more successful revolution in 1911, a smaller uprising occurred in Guangzhou, also known as the Yellow Flower Mound Revolt. Only 72 of the revolutionaries' bodies were ever found. These revolutionaries were then renowned as martyrs. This gave many of the Chinese people a reason to join the revolution.
In 1911, a movement started, gaining the support of many Chinese in response to the Qing's weaker rule. Sun Yat-sen, a doctor, was notable for his large contribution to the revolution and for being China's first president.
Sun Yat-sen is named the first president of China. They put together a constitution, they put together a parliament, but Sun realizes very quickly that he can't hold power.
On October 10, 1911, at 7 p.m., a division of engineers from the new army stationed in Wuchang conquered the city, marking the start of the October Revolution. Many Chinese, concerned with the future of their country, decided to join the revolution.
Most of China's, are peasants, well, what we would call peasants, or they were classified as peasants. Most of those folks were more concerned with eating than a larger worldview. There are, the scholars, the intellectuals, students, high school and mainly college students. They're concerned with China's place in the world, but don't have a lot of impact, a lot of effect.
Imperial Chinese forces and several rebellious detachments from the new army fought until 1912, when the last emperor, Puyi, abdicated from the imperial throne.
Ballots were cast, and Sun Yat-sen was declared the first president of the Republic of China. Although, like the empire, this republic was weak and unable to enforce its word throughout the Middle Kingdom. The republic fractured into many small states ruled by provincial warlords who would try to gain power throughout China. During the Warlord Era, warlord armies were composed solely of Chinese, with a few mercenary exceptions, making the Warlord Era a large-scale civil war composed of many extremist factions. Because of this, battles and wars fought between factions were often vicious and savage, with ruthless hand-to-hand combat.
Warlord armies could be composed of a few number of soldiers or tens of hundreds of thousands. Then these warlord armies would spend millions of dollars on the latest military technologies such as small navies, air forces, small army divisions, and even columns of soldiers supported by heavy machine guns.
Many of these warlords pumped millions of dollars into their militaries and even made immense trains like this, all fitted with machine guns and cannons to spearhead their offenses. Some of the more prominent warlords hired white Russian mercenaries who fled Russia after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Some warlords, like Chang So-lin or Chang Sung-chang, employed thousands of Russian militants. Often, white Russians signed individually, but in many instances entire units of ex-Tsar soldiers signed on to fight in warlord armies across China. Russian soldiers were a very valuable asset to an army, as they were very disciplined and possessed superior fighting skill and training to the Chinese. Along with their superior fighting skill, Russians also brought the most modern in warfare technologies, importing thousands of Mosin-Nagant rifles and heavy artillery. The constant civil war led to a weakened Chinese military. The Japanese would exploit this weakness, and in 1937 they would invade China after a staged incident called the Marco Polo Bridge Incident outside of Beijing in 1937.
Japanese bluntly were messing around in China as best they could for a decade. At least by that time, it started off with really with the Japanese looking to kind of expand commercial interests as well as territorially, kind of trying to compete with the West. But by the time you get into the 20s, the Japanese military is expanding, trying to take territory from China. By the time you get to the end of the 20s, the Japanese are literally staging incidents to try to provoke a war with China.
The Japanese invaded China with 4.1 million soldiers, inflicting over 20 million civilian casualties. The Japanese were ruthless in China, notorious for their rape of Nanking, where they massacred up to 300,000 civilians in a matter of weeks. They were also the only country to use chemical warfare during the course of World War II. After the Japanese surrendered to the Allies in 1945, marking the end of World War II, there was a renewed conflict between the Communists and Nationalists. Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalists, supported by the United States, soon lost their ability to effectively counter the Communist Revolution. After losing huge numbers of men and stockpiles of weapons to the Communists, the Nationalists retreated to the island of Taiwan in 1950, setting up a nationalist government. China then underwent a cultural revolution, and the People's Republic of China was established. And by 1960, China was experiencing a relative time of peace. China was soon on its way to becoming a world power.